Hey, welcome. We got you, we got Bruce, we got Hannah, you got me, Steven, and you're watching. So now we're all together and it's ready for us to identify God's best. This is the channel, as you know, where we discuss what dating looks like for Christians. How do we biblically get to know a person who will hopefully become our spouse? And how does that process look for Christians? How do we honor God in our dating? And with Bruce and Hannah tonight, we're going to be talking about romance. Is romance a biblical concept? We all have a lot of preconceptions about romance, but just to get us started, I thought it'd be fun just for us to go around and discuss what is maybe the most romantic thing you've seen in a movie recently.
Usually have Beauty and the Beast on repeat over here, so I love the scene where the Beast gives Belle like his library, just kind of like offhand, like, oh yeah, if you like it, it's yours. And I've always been like, oh, so romantic.
Because of the Beast or because of the books?
Yeah, maybe the books. Beast isn't bad either.
So it's been a while since I've watched a movie with my wife, but one of my all-time favorite movies have to be The Dark Knight with Batman. And he is quite a romantic dude, if I might say, and convince you. If you recall a particular scene in which Joker has Rachel hostage, he's about to throw her out. You can see Batman, Bruce Wayne, being very extremely selfless and sacrificial. He dives down to catch Rachel and to catch her from the fall. So it always reminds you of, obviously to an infinite lesser degree, because this is fiction, but Christ's sacrifice for us, that is quite romantic, to dive down into a building, a skyscraper, just to catch the love of your life. So it's very romantic, not just a superhero, but a romantic dude.
Caroline convinced me to watch Pride and Prejudice with her. That was a ton of fun. I've actually only read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, so I've never read the original or watched the original. So we watched the Keira Knightley, the more recent one. And I think what we've come to realize, Pride and Prejudice is like great in every way for us. We love like the enemies to lovers. We love British people. We love excellent boiled potatoes. I think there's just something special about British people in the rain having arguments. I don't know, it just does it for me. But anyway, which I guess brings us to the topic at hand. Like when we're talking about romance, we have all these conceptions of romance. We have Beauty and the Beast, we have The Dark Knight, we have Pride and Prejudice. You got all these different ideas. Culturally, we're programmed to think of what a romance is. And so when we come to the question, is romance biblical? At least that gives me a pause a little. Is romance a biblical concept? Do we see romance in the Bible? What do you guys think?
Yes. I think the Bible is full of romance, starting at the Garden of Eden, and God made a perfect universe and put Adam in a beautiful garden paradise, and he had everything that he needed. God was very intentional and thoughtful about what Adam's needs would be and how he could put him in a special place where Adam could really thrive. And there was just a lot of thought that went into that, and it was kind of like romantic for me to go through and study that section of scripture, just how romantic God was and how thoughtful he is for the first man when, you know, the universe is perfect, and then taking him through the garden and showing Adam slowly that he needed a wife, and then boom, immediately providing one. I think that's a really romantic story. What about you, Bruce?
I agree with you absolutely 100%. If you actually look back in Genesis chapter 2, I think it paints for us a really romantic scene for us to look into the first marriage between Adam and Eve and the creation of women. Even if you do a deeper word study into Genesis chapter 2, the word for helper and suitable, it literally means in the Hebrew translated the opposite part, that Eve was created to fit exactly as their counterpart, to make Adam complete. So I think that in of itself, in which God has created for Adam a helper suitable for him, it's a very romantic story that we see between the first man and woman. But I think much more than that, I think it's particularly interesting to look into Adam's response and one of the first words that he says about Eve in Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, where he tells her, after seeing her, this is basically bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman because she came out of man. I think when you also look into a deeper dive into the word for woman, in the Hebrew, it's Isha. I'm pretty sure I'm not mispronouncing it, but that word in its root, it actually means soft. So acknowledging Eve as someone who is soft. And I think this is beyond just the scientific observation of like feeling and touching certain thing, like, oh, this is soft, this is rough, this is hard. Because prior to this, Adam went through a list of animals, of creeping things on this earth, and he was naming things. And most likely, you can imagine him most probably was also touching quite a few different organisms and living things and animals. And I would say probably a lot of God's creation and the animal kingdom, they're also quite soft and nice to the touch. Obviously, other times you have like a snake, which is not that nice to touch. But then you have like dogs, walking by. It's a very soft creature that you can enjoy as well. But then I think this adjective and this description specifically given to Eve is not just like an empirical type of thing from like a scientific method. Like this is just like a very straightforward black and white observation. This item or this object, this person is soft. But I think within it, it also speaks about Eve's preciousness to him and how she is so valuable for him. And that is also contained within the idea of being soft that you would see also elsewhere in scripture. For example, that the wife is the weaker vessel, that an excellent wife is valuable and precious. And I think that's clearly communicated just in the first words that Adam gives to Eve. So that is also really romantic. So husbands, don't be afraid to call your wife your boo-boo. Hey, soft. It makes sense biblically. Anyways, Hannah, keep talking. Don't let me keep going.
There are other stories in Genesis that are also really romantic, not just Adam and Eve, but also Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and Rachel, although their story is a little less dramatic, Ruth and Boaz, Solomon and the Shulamite. Even the way that God describes his relationship with Israel at certain points is really romantic, unless, Israel messes up and then we see that God maybe gets angry, or we see like a wrathful side of God. But we have a God who is romantic in the purest form, and God's people should be an example of pure romance.
I agree with that after calming myself down a little bit more. A few other examples that you see in scripture that also speaks a lot about romance. I'm even thinking of Joseph and Mary, even the way in which Joseph wanted to deal with Mary after finding out that she was pregnant, but then not knowing at that point it was the Spirit who was orchestrating everything to occur in Mary's life. The way in which Joseph went about wanting to ask Mary to leave on her own in the middle of the night, that is actually a very romantic thing that he's doing for her, because he's essentially wanting to save her life. Because at that culture, the natural conclusion without the supernatural God intervention, as we know it as the virgin birth, but if you are found to be with child before you are married, you can get stoned, quite literally, to death. So Joseph's thoughtfulness and kindness and selflessness towards Mary, I would say it's also a very romantic, gentleman-like thing that he's taking great consideration for her. I think additionally, you look at Christ's relationship with the church in Ephesians chapter 5. I mean, that whole passage speaks about romance. It shouts forth romance for us to understand Christ's sacrifice, that in his love, he died for us. And much more than that, in his love, he continues to sanctify us as the church, that he is pursuing us and he cherishes us and he nourishes us so that we can be holy and blameless. That entire passage that oftentimes husbands would take as a high calling, as the role of the leader, as the role of the lover, the nurturer, the sacrifice for his wife. But that is ultimately drawn from the example of Christ's love for his church, for his bride. Christ is very romantic as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. I think it's so cool to see that not only is romance in the Bible, but that romance is by God, that God authors romance, that the original romance is God for his people. And we see that over and over in scripture. Now, on our next video, this is a twofer, we're going to be talking about, now that we know that romance is biblical, now that we know that romance is from God, what does it look like for Christians to be romantic in dating? And so join us again next time, subscribe so that you know when the video is posted. And we're going to talk about romance in dating for Christians. So until then, we'll see you